questions. We've had articles in the local paper. So we have received a great amount of feedback so far, both for and against fluoridation. Council is not disregarding this information by any means, and our research and identification of key issues. Thank you for this information. The session is about providing factual analysis and concern us to make an informed recommendation. Council is committed to fluoridation of Cooktown waters. As such, the council officers asked to facilitate this to utilise in the decision-making. I announced a fluoride rollout through the water fluoridation by local councils in Queensland fluoride to the public potable water supply. 2012, Premier Campbell Newman allowing local government to basically Cooktown water supply was fluoridated on the approximately $360,000, which was fully paid by the state government. The ongoing operational costs are approximately $3.5 per annum. The fluoride scheme has been audited 3 times since commission and has passed the audit. The scheme uses sodium fluoride, granular sodium fluoride. Dose rate is currently 5.7 parts. Forum rules. Each right to speak uninterrupted have the right of reply. Any questions? That no tolerance rule for the speakers is abuse or personal attack. Assistance is required to ensure that everyone has the ability to present their information. Allow the officers to record this. The benefit of recording information, the sources that you refer to. Commence from the side that opposes fluoride and the Cooktown water supply by pro-fluoride proponents. Council officers will then collate the information that has been researched and sources that have been referred to, documented to Council. Develop a report that will be submitted to Council to take into consideration on the issue of...
Thank you everybody for being here, but thank you in particular to Cook Shire for giving us the opportunity to present our case publicly. Are there any councillors in the audience at all? There are, it's fantastic. What Katrina omitted to say is that I was actually a councillor, firstly on Mulgrave Shire and then subsequently with Cairns City Council. So I've sat in your seat. I've been party to these kinds of decisions from time to time, and I really do understand and know what you're confronting and what you're facing and having to make a decision. Beg your pardon?
Stand up. That's good.
Oh, I'm sorry. Sorry, I'll do that.
Yeah.
Not a problem. My presentation, I guess, is about the fact and the fiction surrounding fluoridation. And the first slide is some of the descriptions that have been attributed to people who are anti-fluoridation. Scaremongering eccentric fringe groups, concerned or mildly opposed people, strongly opposed people from alternative health and green backgrounds, strongly opposed people from the socially conservative groups and conspiracy theorists. So I'm not sure how you guys fit into that description if you are anti-fluoride, but I certainly don't relate to those sorts of descriptions. Other things, I'll flash through these because we only have 20 minutes. I did ask for 30, but we've been told that we have 20, so that's the way that it is. One of the descriptions of elected representatives has been that they only want to be re-elected, and personally I object quite strongly to that sort of description. Most elected representatives are there because they want to do the best thing for the community. But newspapers, they're probably not interested in dentistry or fluoridation, they only want a story. Simply holding a debate reinforces the perception that both sides have equally valid viewpoints and not to give them that sort of respectability. Fluoride is not listed as an essential nutrient. So it's not essential for bone health or any other part of the human health conundrum. There are in fact serious restrictions on the use of fluoride. Fluoride is highly poisonous in concentrated dosages. I've got all of the references for the statements that I'm making. In the list of designated hazardous substances, arsenic, fluoride and lead are pretty much on an equal par. Fluoride is a cumulative poison. When ingested, inhaled or absorbed over time in lower concentrations. So we're not talking about massive concentrations all in one hit. We're talking about lower concentrations. While fluoride compounds can in fact cause immediate acute poisoning, the slow onset of toxic effects over time, which is chronic poisoning, is more likely particularly from workplace exposure. So people who are handling fluoride substances have to wear protective clothing and have to be very careful in following the proper precautions before they actually handle that substance. Fluorides exert their toxic effects by inhibiting vital enzymes, disturbing many of the body's chemical processes. And a lot of these references are actually from Queensland Health's own literature. We find that UNICEF say that it has long been known that excessive fluoride intake carries serious toxic effects, but scientists are now debating whether fluoride confers any benefit at all. Fluoride inhibits enzymes that breed acid-producing oral bacteria, and this observation is valid. In fact, what the belief is that topical application is the best application for fluoride products because it's in fact antibacterial. So it's the antibacterial effect that stops those cavities from developing because it destroys the bacteria that caused the cavities in the first place. But one of the scientific opinions is that the harmful impacts actually outweigh any of those sorts of beneficial effects. Fluoride ions bind with calcium ions, which strengthen tooth enamel as it forms in children. That too is something that some of the researchers are saying, well, we're not really convinced that is the activity or the action of the fluoride on the tooth enamel. If it's antibacterial, the suggestion that it's actually absorbed in through the tooth enamel just simply doesn't hold up. But the agreement is universal that excessive fluoride leads to a loss of calcium in the tooth matrix, which leads to the development of caries, particularly when children develop dental fluorosis, which is an effect of having too much fluoride ingested. And I believe that the figures are something like 4 in 100 children will in fact develop some kind of dental fluorosis because of their exposure to fluoride. Not all will, but a significant proportion of children will in fact develop dental fluorosis, which means that they have an unsightly mottling of their teeth, which of course impacts on their self-esteem. So you've got to weigh up whether the benefits outweigh the risks. Clear indication of overexposure when the teeth were developing. The argument is one of risk-benefit. When you consider that what's happening now is that if the fluoride is in the water, everybody gets it. Now, it's only very, very recently that Queensland Health have come out and said everybody benefits from fluoridation. Now, that simply isn't true. And in fact, a lot of their literature up until very recently stated very much the opposite. The beneficial effects of fluoride topically applied to the teeth only last from the post-eruptive period, i.e. when they're toddlers or a little bit older, to when they're about puberty, 12 or 13 years of age. Outside of that, there is no actual benefit in terms of fluoridation, and certainly not the ingestion of fluoride. It's that topical application and the fact that if you're drinking it, it's applied topically anyway. The other thing too, of course, is that we already have lots of different sources of fluoride where we're ingesting fluoride on a daily basis. Now that, combined with the intake of fluoride, particularly in this climate where people tend to drink a lot more water than they would if they lived, say, in the south or in a cooler climate. I don't know how much water you guys drink in the summertime, but I certainly drink at least a couple of litres plus, depending on what I'm doing. If I'm out of doors and I'm perspiring a lot, as are a lot of manual workers, you drink a lot more water. Now, I'm not sure that any of the studies have been done that determine exactly how much water individuals drink on a daily basis that would put them over the limit in terms of the amount of fluoride that they ingest on any given day. That's just one example of dental fluorosis and the way that it can cause mottling. That's a rather severe case. Probably most of them is a mottling of the teeth, which is discoloration, and it could be anything from a rusty colour to grey or greying sorts of colours. But in the more extreme cases, of course, it's quite unsightly. The pathophysiology, it can form hydrofluoric acid in the stomach, which leads to gastrointestinal irritation, and that's the first place that fluoride actually does affect. It disrupts oxidative phosphorylation, glycolysis, coagulation and neurotransmission by binding with calcium in the body. It inhibits your sodium-potassium function, which leads to high levels of potassium, and it leads to various disorders, including people taking fits if they have too much fluoride in their body and if those sorts of effects are being felt. Fluoride toxicity, and I'm not suggesting for one moment that a cumulative dose of fluoride on a daily basis is going to in fact bring about these sorts of acute reactions. However, there is such a thing as subclinical manifestation of the effects of excessive fluoride, which can happen over time. And quite often you'll get diagnosed with arthritis or conditions like that when in fact it's because you've accumulated too much fluoride in your body and in your system. You only ever excrete about 50% of the fluoride that you ingest. The rest is preferentially deposited in your skeleton, in the skeletal tissue, and in the tendons and the ligaments. So that if 95% of that 50% that is residual in your body deposits in your bony structures, then you've got to ask questions about what is actually happening in terms of the mineral status of other minerals in your body. And what happens is that the fluoride actually displaces other minerals. So you then have an imbalance in the minerals in your body and also in the functions that come about as a result of those minerals. Some of the sources of fluoride, and you need to note also that when water is boiled, for example, if you're making a cup of tea or a cup of coffee or cooking your vegetables or whatever, that the fluoride concentration with the evaporation of water through the steam will actually increase in that product. So the fluoride is not only going into the water supply and you're not only drinking it, you're also eating it with all of the food that you eat that's prepared with water. So it's not just the water that you drink. Contraindications, there are a lot of people who shouldn't have fluoride at all. The American Dental Association, in fact, recommends that any babies that are fed bottle fed should never have their formulas reconstituted using fluoridated water because of the potential damaging effects to the baby, particularly with dental fluorosis. So, pregnant women, malnourished children and adults, children with impaired mineral metabolism, and in particular people with kidney diseases, they are less tolerant of fluoride that's ingested. They are less able to mobilise and metabolise the fluoride that they take into their bodies. Particularly when we note that the fluoride that you're getting in your water supply is not the fluorine that occurs in your food naturally. It's not the fluoride that occurs naturally in water supplies. I believe that some of the water supplies in this area even have rather high concentrations of fluoride. And as I understand, I might be wrong, you can correct me, but those areas are not to be fluoridated simply because they already have high concentrations of fluoride in their natural water. But that fluoride that you're getting in that water that's supplied naturally, which can cause fluorosis as well, is not the same as the one that you're getting in your water supply. The stuff that you're getting in your water supply is waste product. It's toxic waste product from fertiliser manufacturing industries and also from the aluminium smelting industry. So, you know, comparing apples with apples, and none of the research has been done on the fluoride that you're getting put into your water supply. That research has been done on other forms of fluoride, and you need to be aware of that. 1 in 7 Australians have impaired kidney function. Maybe more, it may be slightly less, but the figures that I've got is that it's 1 in 7. That's an awful lot of people, and I suspect that here in Cooktown, there are a lot of people with impaired kidney function, because in far north Queensland we have an extremely high incidence of kidney disease.
Is that taking into consideration of the people?
Sorry, I can't hear you. I'm profoundly deaf, so anything that you call out to me, I'm not able to
Continue on.
So the question is, how much fluoride do you or members of your family ingest on a daily basis, cumulatively over time, remembering that you only excrete 50% of the fluoride that you drink or that you take into your body at any time. So that other 50% is deposited in your body cumulatively over time. So how do you know if you or a member of your family might not be at risk of excessive fluoride intake? Appropriate dosages for young children, this comes from Queensland Health Guidelines, during the period of the development of the crowns of the permanent teeth, which is generally 6 to 8 years, should be based on the current carrier's risk status of the child and the availability of an alternative appropriate topical fluoride administration to the child. Now I have to tell you that this information was current for Queensland Health prior to Anna Bligh bringing in mandatory fluoridation. For some reason, suddenly the parameters change, and suddenly it's okay for children to be fluoridated through the water supply. And yet, immediately prior to that, Queensland Health's own guidelines said, hey, you know, you've got to make certain considerations before you think about supplementing with fluoride. Water fluoridation is supplementation with fluoride. You need to estimate the existing intake of fluoride from all discretionary sources, i.e. from your food, from other things that you drink, from whatever. The ability of the child to spit out, as we all know of your parents, your child doesn't learn that spitting reflex until maybe 3-4 years of age, and even some older. They can't just spit. They dribble, but they don't spit. And they warned against the ingestion of fluoride, that you shouldn't use fluoridated toothpaste for young children because they can't spit it out. There's a risk that they will swallow it. Well, if there was a risk that they would become injured or harmed through swallowing it, pre-mandatory fluoridation, what has changed? Why is it now not a risk? I don't know. So for children under 4 years, fluoride supplements should only be recommended if no alternative form of topical administration is available to the child. So what benchmarks have been established to justify the supplementation of young children's diets with fluoridated water? Again, I don't know what the answer is. I'm not aware that any studies have been done that suddenly changed Queensland Health's mind towards the idea that mandatory fluoridation for the entire population is perfectly okay. I don't get it when the literature quite categorically stated something very different prior to the government bringing in the idea of mandatory fluoridation. So unless the intake is excessively high, the onset of any symptoms is usually quite slow. But you may not necessarily know or link your symptoms with your intake of fluoride, because it is a slow onset. But that's not, fluoride isn't the only substance that gives you a slow onset of symptoms, which I'll come to. So some individuals are more at risk. So how do you determine that? How do you know? So how logical is it to mass medicate the entire population when there are so many people for whom fluoridation is contraindicated? Given the complexity of getting it right, surely the cautionary principle should be exercised, not forced fluoridation. Forced medication of a known toxic substance and legislation that prevents legal action should a person suffer any ill effects from that substance just doesn't make sense. I don't know if you're aware, but the Queensland Government had enacted legislation that prevents any one of you, if at any time you suffer any sort of harmful effects from that fluoridated water, you cannot sue them. Neither can you sue any member of the government, nor can you sue the officers of the government. Now, in any other industry, in any other workplace, in any other avenue, If you are harmed by a substance, you have a right of redress for that. You have no right of redress. If at some point in time it is established quite categorically, as it has been with other substances, you have no right to sue the government for compensation because of your ill health. 2 minutes. Well, that's sort of cutting us very short, and I did ask if we could go for longer, but obviously we can't. So if any of you want a copy of the slides that I've prepared, with all of the references and all of that information, I'm really happy to email them to you and to give you the full information. I can give you all of the references, I can give you lots of literature and information to assist you to make a decision in regard to the fluoridation of the water supply. And I really thank you for being here. As I said, councillors, I've been in your shoes. I know what it's like to have to make these sorts of decisions. And you've got to be brave, I guess, and you've got to be able to say, who am I going to represent? Am I going to represent the community who elected me to be here and their interests, or am I going to bow down to bureaucrats who have their own vested interest in having fluoridation in the water supply? Thank you very much. I would like to take, Michael has to put his up, not really a technocrat.
Actually failed to introduce himself very important council to go through this with himself, go through this. Now we'll have Dr. Michael Foley speak for the pro-fluoride campaign, the Australian Dental Association. Thanks, Michael.
Everybody for inviting me up here and talk about quite a few aspects of fluoridation and a little bit about part of the world. The reality of tooth decay is that by the age of 5 or 6, half our kids in Australia already have tooth decay. By 8 or 9, it's up to 2/3. I reference most of my documents, most of my statements down below, and I have copies of most of these documents to check them. Tooth decay is the most common cause of emergency preventable hospital admission in Australia. And in some parts of the world, particularly up in some Indigenous communities, it is horrendously expensive. Hardly need to say the impact of tooth decay on our society. Back in about 80 years ago, American public health researchers realised that people who were living in areas that had naturally levels of fluoridated water at about 1 part per million had significantly less tooth decay than people who were living in areas with lower levels of fluoride. Led to an artificial trial in Grand Rapids, Michigan in 1945. Grand Rapids, Michigan is still fluoridated 68, almost 69 years later. And after the first trials, which decay rates plummeted by about 60% to dramatic drops within a few years, water fluoridation spread around America, many other countries, including Australia. Before the 2008 legislation, this was the situation in Australia. About 5% of Queensland was fluoridated. Almost all of that was Townsville, which was fluoridated in 1964, so has now been fluoridated for almost 50. Other parts of the country, those percentages, this map was 2007, those percentages have increased in the other states and territories since then. You might also be able to see the dates that it was introduced. So Townsville 1964, Darwin 72, Perth 68, Adelaide 71, Melbourne 77, Hobart 64, Canberra 64, Sydney 68. So most of Australia has now been fluoridated for at least 40 years. So has that affected our dental health? Well, yes it has. Child dental health surveys, which are now regularly conducted in Australia every year or two, show that Queensland kiddies, at whatever age, have significantly more. It's a very consistent picture over now more than 20 years, showing that Queensland kids have more tooth decay than kids in other states. The child dental health surveys are conducted every year or two. They have a different theme every year. Sometimes it might be the effect of dental health in remote areas or number of dental visits. Well, the 2002 Child Dental Health Survey looked at water fluoridation. they examined 136,000 children around Australia, and they found that no matter where the child lived, what age, where they lived, whether they were rich or poor or in between, whether they were living in a capital city or remotely, whatever they broke it down to, the kids with fluoridated water had significantly less tooth decay than the kids who didn't have fluoridated water. That was supported by a major paper that came out just a few months ago, looking at, and I have copies of these papers here, looking at every study in the 20-year period from 1990 to 2010, anywhere around the world in whatever language. They found 59 studies looking at the effects of water fluoridation. Every single one of those 59, without exception, showed a significant reduction in tooth decay, averaging at about 40%. That study's in Queensland. Well, some of you will have heard of the Townsville-Brisbane study. Again, I have a copy here if anybody wants to have a look at it. Finding an average of 45% less tooth decay in Brisbane children, in Townsville children than Brisbane children. We would expect the other way around, because capital cities usually have less tooth decay. Townsville has a higher Indigenous population, but we found the reverse. And it wasn't just a little bit, an average of 45% less tooth decay in Townsville children than Brisbane children. We have a more recent study, yes we do. After the introduction of fluoridation in Queensland, we did the QCOS study, Queensland Child Oral Health Survey, where about 5,500 children were examined randomly around Queensland. The only area that wasn't randomly selected was Townsville, and they over-represented Townsville. Wanted about 1,700 children from Townsville. They found it was about a 35% reduction in tooth decay experience in Townsville. Now, the true effect of fluoride will actually be greater than that, because they didn't even break down those children in Townsville to include only those children who had grown up all their lives in Townsville. Townsville has a fairly fluid population. There are always kids and adults coming in from other parts of Queensland as well. So the true effect of fluoridation will be greater than that 35%. That study is not published yet. I only got a briefing on it just last week. But only for children. Well, no, it's not. A few years ago around Australia, we had about 5,500 adults were examined, all ages, all around Australia, again randomly chosen. Again, a significant reduction in tooth decay experience, in fillings, extractions, in those who had grown up, in those who were drinking fluoridated water. And I make the point here that many of those adults had not grown up drinking fluoridated water. Many of those adults had come from the pre-fluoride generation, pre-fluoridated water and pre-fluoride toothpaste. So the effect of the fluoridated water is well and truly is decades after the fluoride has been added to the water, and we're still getting benefits. So yes, everybody, adults and children, will benefit from it. So it's effective, but is it cost effective? Well, yes it is too. 11 years ago, Queensland Health commissioned an independent study. I've got a bit about Jaguar Consulting down below. They're a highly reputable firm down in Melbourne. They found, it's the technophobe as Annette is.
Bloody arrow keys.
Thank you very much. Jaguar Consulting concluded that water fluoridation is an extremely effective public health expenditure. This is consistent with the findings of virtually all the literature on this subject. This was their findings. They included many different scenarios, but these are the relevant ones for us. Populations greater than 1,000 people. These are 2002 dollar values. Depending on the scenario around Queensland, over the lifespan of fluoridation plants, we would save anywhere from many hundreds of millions of dollars to over $1 billion. These are just in saved dental costs, in saved fillings and dental work. Those figures, I've read the study, their conclusions were very conservative. They didn't include things like bridge work and implants and dentures and crowns and root fillings. They only included fillings, which are a lot cheaper than some of those other things. Those figures are highly conservative. The same Jaguar consulting firm did a similar investigation in Melbourne, found that the first 25 years of water fluoridation in Melbourne had saved Melbourne more than $1 billion. Not million, more than $1 billion. Another quote, Professor Theo Voss, currently in Washington, but for many years was Professor of Public Health at the University of Queensland, has an international reputation for burden of disease studies. Just last year produced this paper with Dr. Kobiak. Public dental care in crisis. There is now a sharp divide in dental health between rich and poor and between major cities and the bush, and concluded extending coverage of fluoridation to all communities will lead to improved population health, dominant cost effectiveness ratio and 100% probability of cost savings. We will save an absolute truckload of money through water fluoridation in Queensland. This support is evidence-based. Now, evidence-based is a particular term, and it refers to high-quality studies, credible studies, peer-reviewed by other scientists, researchers and public health experts. These peer-reviewed studies have proven the effectiveness of water fluoridation now for more than 60 years. I quote an article from Choice magazine, which some of you get, my wife does. Claims of those who oppose fluoridation are often based on outdated information, questionable research and selectively picking studies that support their case. This is Choice magazine, which is a highly independent body. Strength of scientific evidence goes through a few areas. We can find stuff on the internet, we can ask our friends, we can get a study that somebody does but it's not actually published, or if it is published it's self-published. We can get a study that's peer-reviewed, actually looked at by other experts in the field. We can also get evidence from a systematic review. A systematic review is where we get a lot of studies. A group of experts is brought together to investigate all the studies that have been conducted on such and such a topic. Systematic review means they weed out the weak studies, they only get the strong studies and they come to a conclusion. And the strongest evidence, of course, which is also fluoridation, is evidence by multiple systematic reviews. And there are many of these international reviews on fluoride and fluoridation that have been done over the last few years. I've picked many of them here, and they come from America, the US Surgeon General, the UK Medical Research Council, the Irish Government, Health Canada, our own National Health and Medical Research Council, Health Canada, the European Commission, and the national academies in the US. I'm not aware of any government body anywhere in the world, any reputable systematic review other than those basically written by anti-fluoride groups that come out against water fluoridation. We know that there is opposition to water fluoridation. I have not spoken with any of your councillors here, but if they are like councillors in the rest of Queensland, they will have been inundated with anti-fluoridation material, letters, emails. Most of that material will not have come from Cooktown. It will have come from Cairns, Brisbane, New Zealand, New York, wherever, because the anti-fluoride groups, as is right, are superbly coordinated. They do not attack Sydney and Melbourne and Canberra and all those places. They concentrate on the areas that are considering fluoridation, goes around the email groups, and if it's Cook or if it's Cairns, wherever, they're then flooded with emails and letters, and that's their right. So we live in a wonderful free world where people can do these things. Please don't think that because Cooktown people and Cookshire councils are being inundated with evidence from anti-fluoride groups that represents scientific evidence, because it clearly does not. Does all this mean that Queenslanders don't want fluoridated water? Well, no, it doesn't. These are the reputable polls that I'm aware of that have been conducted in the last 15 years or so, mostly in the lead up to the water fluoridation legislation in 2008. You could argue that the Australian Dental Association and Queensland Health are biased, but their figures are pretty much the same as every other study. Councillors will know Greg Hallam, who's been running the Local Government Association of Queensland for many years. I spoke with Greg in 2005 and he said, look, we don't want fluoridation. He said, we're inundated with all these letters and people don't want it, but to put the issue to bed, we'll put out a study. And I remember Greg very, very well, because he said, and we've gone to the best pollsters in Australia, and I forget who they were, but he said they're John Howard's pollsters, because John Howard was PM at the time. Lo and behold, what did they find? Exactly the same as all the other studies. About a 2 or 3 or 4 to 1 majority of people actually support water fluoridation. But the silent majority is usually silent. But even if it's good though, is it unethical or is it mass medication? No. Governments, whether local or state or federal, have to balance wishes of a few people, which they certainly have to respect, because we all have wishes and what we'd like in the world, and balance that against what the majority of people think, and balance that amongst the greater good for the whole community. The costs of not fluoridating, that's the financial costs, the health costs and the social costs of not fluoridating, are huge. Queenslanders have been paying that price now for decades, and we have the worst teeth in the country, and we're actually paying for the privilege of having the worst teeth in the country, when a clear majority of Queenslanders want water fluoridation. The Royal College of Physicians in the UK pointed it out a few years ago. We're not talking about a trivial disease. About 10 years ago, there was a little kid who went into hospital down the Gold Coast and didn't come out of it, purely to have dental work done. People still die from dental anaesthesia. Mass medication. I've heard this argument 100,000 times, well, 100 times, and it is a very emotive argument. But no health authority, government authority or legal authority anywhere in Australia has ever referred to fluoride as a medication. Fluoride is already in all water supplies, whether they're fluoridated or not, because it's a natural substance and it's in the water and it's in the soil and it's in the veggies and all those sorts of things. It is simply not a medication, and nobody has ever claimed it to be a medication. NHMRC and the Federal Department of Health and Ageing and the New Zealand Ministry of Health refer to it as a nutrient, essential nutrient, because of its, and there's a question coming up on this later, which I'm well aware of. Chlorine in the water, is that mass medication? Well, most people would agree that it's not. A few years ago, the federal government mandated the addition of folic acid, iodised salt and thiamine to all bread products, all flour used to make bread products. So all the bread we get from our local supermarket and our local bakery in Australia, all around Australia, has those things added to it. Folic acid to prevent spina bifida and spinal neural tube defects, the thiamine to prevent neural pathologies and what POWs used to call beriberi, and the iodised salt to prevent goiter and the mental retardation associated with iodine deficiencies. Now, I'm not going to suffer from any of those things, so I don't need all those things in my bread. But I think most people around Australia would say, well, hang on, that's just good, sensible public health measure that improves the health of Australians. And I think most people would say the same about water fluoridation. British Medical Association a few years ago said that we fortify lots of things, whether it's orange juice or baby food or whatever. And the fortification of fluoride deficient water to bring about a substantial health benefit is no different to that. That's from the British Medical Association. So who actually supports water fluoridation? We've seen from the previous presentation there's quotes and there's a few people mentioned. I noticed one of those was UNICEF, which I can categorically assure you does not oppose water fluoridation. One statement that you can find on the internet is a briefing paper that an anti-fluoride person sent to UNICEF. It does not represent UNICEF's view. But the people who do support water fluoridation are these people, and I can assure you I could go for slide after slide after slide of many more. These are not people who are easily browbeaten and there is no worldwide conspiracy theory or anything like that. These are the major health bodies in Australia and overseas. In Australia, for example, our top medical bodies, the AMA, Royal College of Physicians, Royal College of GPs, all support water fluoridation. Our top health advisory body, the National Health and Medical Research Council, supports water fluoridation. Our top scientific body, the Australian Academy of Sciences, supports water fluoridation. The top dental body, the Australian Dental Association, supports water fluoridation. Who else? The top consumer body, Choice, supports water fluoridation. And I've noticed some claims about kidney disease and thyroid disease and diabetes. Well, those particular bodies also support water fluoridation. Arthritis Australia, Osteoporosis Australia, Diabetes Australia. I'm not aware of any reputable health authority in Australia that does not strongly support water fluoridation for all Australians. Summary, quotes from the World Health Organisation. Fluoride dental health, part of the basic human right to life. Where possible, the most effective public health measure for the prevention of dental decay. Community water fluoridation, one of the 10 great public health achievements of the 20th century. My favourite after the Beijing Olympics, Michael Phelps, best thing to happen to water since fluoridation. That's my 20 minutes. Thank you very much for your attention. I appreciate the invitation to speak. Thank
you. We did have in time for... It's all right, that's all right. Happy enough.
Whoever asked that question, I'm happy to meet up later to talk.
The next question was outdoor workers in Cooktown. I would expect to have some...
Yeah, and it's a good question. Skeletal fluorosis can happen. There are some parts of the world in China, India and Africa that I'm aware of that have very high levels of fluoride naturally occurring in the world, in their water. And skeletal fluorosis is bones can thicken, joints can stiffen up. It's a nasty condition. But we're talking far higher levels. Now, I accept full well that in North Queensland there are many people who drink a lot of water. I make the point though that there are many people in Townsville, in Darwin, in Singapore, right on the equator, and Malaysia and Hong Kong that also work outside and also drink a lot of water. Those places have been fluoridated for decades. They do not see any increase in skeletal fluorosis. It's been said that it could just be diagnosed as arthritis. But Arthritis Australia has actually rejected that argument and say they're strongly in favour of fluoridation. It simply doesn't happen. A couple of years ago I actually looked up the scientific literature, searched for skeletal fluorosis, and in the Western world I couldn't find any cases in the scientific literature in Australia. I found 2 cases in America of mild skeletal fluorosis. Both were people in their early 50s. One was a lady who since the age of 14 had been drinking double-strength tea. Now, we know some teas have high levels of fluoride. She'd been drinking the equivalent of a cup of tea every 20 minutes of her waking life for 40 years and had developed pains in her neck and shoulder and back. The other case that was reported in the scientific literature was a psychiatric case with a gentleman who was about 50 who for decades had been eating toothpaste through simply a psychiatric disorder. Now, the skeletal fluorosis can happen, but the rarity is such that, when you see, when it's seen, it's in the scientific literature. And the fact that they were the only 2 cases I could find in the Western scientific literature says to me it's not an issue. And it's certainly not an issue, as I said, in Townsville, Darwin, Singapore, Malaysia and lots of other hot climates. Fluoridation is a very safe...
And we will use those sources of information
to ask questions to the speakers. Asking some really interesting people
involved.
It was advertised as running till 7:30 and it's only 7 o'clock, so surely that means we have a half hour. Wonderful. Are you guys happy to stay here and answer some questions? Wonderful. Audience, are we happy to stay here and ask some questions?
Yeah.
Beautiful. Let's do it. Who's got a question?
Yes?
You're standing in a fluoridated swimming pool.
How much would you absorb through your skin?
How much fluoride would you absorb through your skin if you stay in a pool for an hour?
It would be very little. We have many people here who will go for a swim in the ocean, for example. Well, the level of fluoride in the ocean is double what it is in the water here. A fluoride ion is a fluoride ion is a fluoride ion. There's no difference between the fluoride ions. We're talking sodium fluoride, the advantage, which is the same as the fluoride tablets that I took as a kid and many others will take as a kid. There are many different sorts of fluoride in the ground.
Michael, are you sure? Can anybody answer what form of fluoride is that's used in Cooktown's water supply?
Sodium fluoride.
I'm asking the opposite.
Sorry.
Sodium
granular
fluoride?
form.
The sodium fluoride dissolves 100% and breaks down 100% when it's dissolved in water. And it breaks down into fluoride ions and sodium ions, which are the same as the fluoride and sodium ions, which are already in.
I just like to make a suggestion. I've thought about both sides of it, and my answer would be no, because I feel that I think it probably does do wonders. Just worried about the Pandora's box effect. You don't really know long term whether people got it right, and it's too late to put the buttons back on. And to me, the solution is pretty simple. If you decided, fluoridation is for you and for your family, you have to fluoride 2 patients.
Excuse me, but is this being a public...
I was just going to ask the question.
If we could just leave it to the question.
Okay, well, my question
We're just looking for the information.
was, is it possible to have 2-page spread in the paper of, for and against, and then some form of community voting, like a questionnaire, or if you want to make it really formal, you come up here and present your idea, so that the council has an overview of what people really think. Is something else, or is us who are going to be talking to all?
I mentioned
Sorry, that was going to be my question.
that's more of a question. We have reviewed all of the information that's been held. We have broken down by who's within the region.
Can I respond to the lady?
Oh, hold on, please. So what we are doing is what we're doing is we're taking aside that information. We will present a report to council.
I mean, I think you've done a great job, all the training and stuff, but you still haven't actually gained the opinion of people.
I think we could do this in many. We could cut the pie. I think we could cut pie in a number of different ways at the moment that we have decided we would approach. You can speak.
Can I just speak, Steve Wilton, CEO of Cooktown, in case anyone doesn't know me. When the report is presented to Council with a recommendation by the officers, Council may still elect to do a survey or a referendum on the function for tonight. Was my point of view as a council officer was mainly for the councillors to receive information components of both sides of the argument. I think both sides have presented very well tonight. So there still may be an opportunity for a referendum if the councillors feel that they need to do that.
Can I just respond to
councillors.
something that the lady here has said? And the point, I will stand up, sorry. The point about the effects being known further down the line. There are a number of instances that you will all know about and you will all be familiar with. And I have had a lot of experience with asbestos-related diseases. Now, I know the history of it inside out. And I know that the medical profession, the government, everybody who was in authority on it, for many, many years, disregarded the scientific advice that was being given to them that asbestos causes significant impacts on human health, i.e. asbestosis, pleural plaque, and also mesothelioma and lung cancer. Now, the effects of that substance is not felt for maybe 20 years or 40 years plus is when it becomes evident and people get these diseases. Now, it is recognised that asbestos causes these diseases, but I can assure you that people were still fighting in the courts until very, very recently in relation to this particular issue. And people were presenting information that supported asbestos. So there are many, many substances such as tobacco, asbestos and various drugs that have been shown over time to cause harm to human health. And I believe quite firmly that fluoride is one of those substances which in time will be categorically demonstrated to cause harm to human health.
Do you want to respond to that?
Well, and it's been in Grand Rapids, Michigan for almost 69 years. When is it going to start causing harm?
How do you know that it hasn't, and where are the studies that have been done to demonstrate that the sorts of harm that we're talking about, i.e. the pathophysiological effects of it over time, are not attributable? You see, that's the whole thing, is that these diseases that can now be attributed to these substances such as asbestos and tobacco, up until relatively recently, it was denied that they caused it. And even in some parts of the world today, there is denial that asbestos causes mesothelioma and causes lung cancer and so forth. It's still happening.
I think we're talking about fluoride though, not...
We are talking about fluoride. And how do you know that fluoride is not another one of those substances that in time will be categorically shown to cause diseases? Because a lot of the research does show that it does cause various diseases that you're denying that it causes.
I don't deny that it will cause disease. Anything can hurt if you have enough of it.
That's exactly
too much
right,
oxygen,
and
too
that's the
much
whole
water,
point.
too much salt, too much iron. Everything will hurt you if you have too much of it.
Absolutely, including fluoride.
Yep.
We should have choice. We should.
Yes, you do. There's water tanks filled with water, bottled water.
People have to go
that Shane is on the panel, whether he's noticed a difference in dental fluoride intake, not just the 60 years, but...
Okay, I don't know that I've been introduced, but I'm Shane Herbst. I'm the principal.
Could you speak up a bit, mate?
I'm the principal dental officer with Queensland Health with Cape York. Prior to my current position, I was a dentist here in Cooktown. I was here for 7 years. I do know a number of you. In response to Tasha's question, there are several communities on the Cape where there is a natural fluoride in the water. Ones that come to mind are Cowan, where it's lower than the recommended rate. You also find that one of the water schemes down in Douglas Shire has a low level of natural fluoride. Some of those are out of bores and some are out of fluoride out of. Now, I would dispute and claim that there's a difference between natural fluoride and added fluoride. But fluoride is an element. It's a single molecule, okay? As every fluoride molecule or in its ionized state as it's dissolved in water is exactly the same. It doesn't matter whether it comes out of a chemical planet or it dissolves out of a rock down here on the coastal range. As far as difference in decay rates, notice, and I am the person that goes, we notice significantly lower decay in Kownyama. We notice somewhat lower decay in health professionals who look at this. It's obvious that there's a difference. I'll also say I've worked a number of other jurisdictions, very high level of fluoride in very hot tropical climate where people were drinking a lot of water, so they were getting a lot of fluoride. What I would say there is that there was virtually no decay in drink that had been brought up in Tennant Creek and with a lot of fluorosis, okay? That's an unfortunate consequence. Certainly not aware of any general problems, and in Tennant Creek had been a long, long time, probably.
Just a quick question. What's the fluoride industry worth in Australia? Like people who are buying stuff and the fitting of the fluoridisation plants and that, what's it worth in Australia? Like, we know what all the other industries are worth, it's all stated what this industry and that industry is worth.
No idea, I'm sorry.
Maybe we should find out.
Yeah, probably good.
If it's so safe, why can't we take litigation against the government if it goes wrong?
Most alarming sort of news, the comments on research. Reference to a Harvard University study, high IQs with fluoride. Know the study?
Yes, I'm aware of it.
Okay, please comment on this one.
It's a compilation of a group of studies that have been done mostly in China, looking at differences in IQ levels in different Chinese, usually way out in the remote areas of China, in different towns with different levels of fluoride in the water. Findings of that, when they compile all of the results of all those studies, they concluded that the fluoridated areas, the areas that had really high levels of natural fluoride water, the kids had lower IQs than the kids in areas that had lower levels of fluoride.
Was there any arsenic or lead in the water?
I haven't read all of the studies. I've read quite a few of them. My field of expertise is epidemiology, which is the science of public health research. I'll tell you that I use a couple of those studies with my students to show them an example of how poorly you can do a study. Now, I think the implication from that is that fluoride in fluoridated water could lower IQs. Now, I could make the argument, though, that I don't think Townsville, the last 50 years, I don't think fluoridation has affected their IQs. The rest of Australia, I don't think fluoridation has affected their IQs. NAPLAN scores, Queensland actually does worse than the other states, not better. And it's a known effect, but particularly since it's been measured, many parts of the world particularly since World War II, which is about the time that fluoridation started, that average IQs around the world, as measured by IQ tests, have actually been steadily rising.
The US is 64.
Yes, that's called the Flynn effect. Now, you can find all about it
So
on
can we
Google.
say that fluoride increases your IQ?
No, I'm not saying that.
I'm being facetious.
Yes, no, I'm not saying that, but I'm saying it certainly has no effect on IQ.
Off track, but very emotive. Obviously in government side there is any...
Federal Department of Health and Ageing in Australia and every state and territory government in Australia strongly supports water fluoridation.
Your closing comment that down to bureaucrats who have their own vested interest in having fluoridation. What are those vested interests when they themselves would be consuming the same?
I guess that the vested interest is that they all, the official view is that fluoridation is a good thing for the community. So that their vested interest is not a material interest, obviously, but it's a professional interest in that they now change their minds. They have egg on their faces professionally. We're now saying that fluoridation is not a good thing. So it's really a professional vested interest in maintaining a position, not being willing to change that position.
Yep. Other things too, is it, I mean, there certainly weren't interested in the difference between natural fluoride and others. And
That's been answered, but
I'll answer the first one about the if you Google Nazis or Stalin fluoride, there are thousands of websites out there that say that either Stalin in his gulags or Hitler in his concentration camps put fluoride in the water to keep people placid. It is an urban myth. Some of you will know the Fluoride Action Network, probably the major anti-fluoride website in the world. Even the people that run that reject that. They admit that it's an urban myth. I can't argue against it, other than to say that Germans were like the British. They wrote everything down. There has never been any suggestion, any paper or anything like that suggested that the Germans or anyone else put fluoride in the water to dumb people down. It simply never happened. The people in the other states are not more placid or dumbed down than what people in Queensland. It's simply not a fair argument. Whether they were different or not.
Yes.
Yes, I can answer that. There are many types of fluoride. It's often said calcium fluoride, but fluoride joins up with a lot of other things. Now, putting calcium fluoride in the water will not actually do much good because the calcium and fluoride bind together well. To get that measured level of fluoride iron in the water, you need the fluoride iron because it's the fluoride iron that actually strengthens the teeth. But to get that iron, you need a particular fluoride chemical that will dissolve and break down into that iron. Calcium fluoride will not do that when dissolved in water. Sodium fluoride will, so that's why they use sodium.
Hey man, just about you saying that it's the fluoride, it doesn't matter what form of fluoride it is, it's the fluoride ions.
Yep.
Now you're saying they go on the teeth, yeah?
Yes.
Do they go anywhere else in the body?
Yes, they do.
Yep, they go through the bones and stuff?
Yes, they do.
Yep, cool. How about the pineal?
Yes.
Which has long been appreciated as being the seat of the soul. I mean, I don't know how many people here...
Yes. I don't think that's a medical term.
It's not a medical term, no, but the calcification of the pineal in fluoridated water is such that these days they're using it as a point in MRIs, is that right?
Yes.
To find brain tumours?
Yes.
Yeah, now, that must mean it's really got a lot of fluoride in there, isn't it? Because it looks like a bone. I've seen the MRIs.
Yes.
You see the skull, solid white.
Yes.
You see the pineal,
yes.
solid white.
Yep.
A gland should not be of the same, well, magnetic resonance as bone, should it?
Yes, but the pineal gland contains hydroxyapatite, which is the mineral that our tooth enamel is made of.
So?
And hydroxyapatite accumulates fluoride. Now, I'm not a doctor, I don't know the purpose of it, but it is a completely natural process.
It's a completely natural process.
I would expect the pineal gland, because it has hydroxyapatite in it, to absorb some fluoride.
Oh, it absorbs so much that it calcifies completely.
Yep.
You get granules in there just like kidney stones.
Yep.
Now, that's not a natural way for your pineal to be, is it? Because, I mean, why is it all of a sudden that with the introduction of fluoride in the water, we're seeing it showing up calcified in MRIs? Yeah?
But you'll find it in lots of,
But let's look at...
How do you know it
What your
didn't?
point is.
How do you know
Yes?
it didn't
Hang on,
occur?
sorry, yes?
How do you know that it didn't occur previously?
Because you look at people who don't drink fluoridated water,
No.
and they don't have calcified pineals. It's that simple.
Back before MRIs.
Back before MRIs? Yeah, well, of course. But we're looking at the information now where you've got people who drink fluoridated water and have calcified pineals showing up in MRIs, and people who don't drink fluoridated water and they don't show up calcified pineals. Now, the pineal is responsible for, is it melatonin, I think it is?
Yes, it is.
Yes, thank you. What's melatonin's function in the body?
It's related to
The night, the sleeping rhythms, isn't it? Your circadian rhythms. So calcification, onset of puberty. Yeah, beautiful.
I'm
Now,
not a doctor, so
the onset of puberty is getting younger and younger, isn't it?
yes, it is.
Yeah. So that's not a good thing.
The onset of puberty.
Even in Queensland. Thank you.
For the last few decades,
Yeah.
please listen. For the last
Except for in
few,
the foods.
for the last few decades, wherever it has been measured around the world, certainly the Western world, puberty has been getting younger and younger, and it's by about 3 months every decade, and it has occurred equally whether places and countries are fluoridated or not fluoridated.
How about
The doctor won't tell
fluoride?
why that is. The doctor will tell why that is, but it is not related to fluoride.
But see, I'd argue that it is related to fluoride because we're seeing fluoride. We're seeing.
On to any other questions? Yes.
I think it gets down to a matter of short decision about those people who do want to put fluoride in. I don't, I've taken measures to take it
When you
out.
go for a swim, you'll also get it.
If you go down to the salt, we go to the salt, clear the salt down beach. Yeah. But it's a matter of choice. I think it's freedom of choice, and that's a democratic right. And that's my main.
The irony is that most cirrhosis is caused by kids.
I just want to quickly tie up, man. Would you agree with me if you're saying the calcification of the pineal is affecting melatonin production, is affecting the function of the pineal?
I think
I mean, it's getting calcified.
I think
It's a gland which is becoming a bone.
the top medical experts in that field are your physicians, your Royal College of Physicians in the UK and Australia, and they both support fluoridation. I think you'd have to argue strongly with them that it's harming people or hurting people or affecting the melatonin or something. But I don't think they agree with that argument.
I think we need a physician to answer.
Yes, it kills bugs. There are still some towns in Queensland which do not have chlorine in the water, and some of those have every few years there'll be an outbreak of a E. coli waterborne gastric illness. Still happens in Queensland, but when the water is chlorinated, it will not happen.
Pills.
Yeah, I
Quite
don't,
simple.
yes, I don't particularly
You
like
like as much
taking pills
fluoride as you
myself.
like. Take as many pills as you like.
Yeah, I don't like taking pills.
All right.
I don't like drinking water.
We're going to wrap up.
Sorry, how much fluoride is in water supply naturally?
Sure, it takes it up to
Dentists know?
Yeah, most of the coastal Queensland towns and cities have about 0.1 to 0.2 parts per million occurring naturally. So you've usually got to top it up by 0.4 or thereabouts.
Thanks very much for coming, everyone. And this week we will put our report together and it will go to council.
Have to just have that hand done.
I have, if